Going to move on now to our next presentation in this section, which again is using reference data and semantics from theory to practice. And we're next going to hear from taxonomy consultant Helen Lippell about taxonomy interoperability and how to make it work well, which is, of course, the important question. And I will remind the audience once again to use that QR code. Use the hashtag endorse2023. If you want to navigate to your Slido browser, you can just go to slido.com and put that in. There's no need to download anything. Helen, are you there? Can you hear me? And are you ready with your presentation?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Can you hear me and can you see some slides?
I can indeed. Excellent.
Fantastic. Thank you. No, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here and to hear from friends old and new. So this is a super quick run through of some of the basics of around mapping taxonomies and vocabularies, and this can be taxonomies that you manage or someone else in your organization manages, or it can be taxonomies that you're consuming from an external source, and I'll give some examples of these later. So I'm going to be covering some common use cases, again, not comprehensive, but these are the most common ones that I've come across in my career. And some of the technical aspects of actually doing the mapping and trying to work out, is this thing the same as this thing, and what you can do around that. And then finally, really the most critical thing, all the business aspects of it, because it's not just a nice technical job that you do as a one-off. It's something you need to make sustainable in order to be useful, and especially where you have very complex vocabularies. I know many of the organisations at this conference have those. So, tiny bit about me, not going to use up too much time on that. I'm a taxonomy consultant. I'm based in the UK, so glad you can have us still. Worked across the public sector, private sector, worked sort of international organisations as well. So I feel like I've seen a lot of different use cases and problems and opportunities in using controlled vocabularies. So moving on to use cases, probably one of the the ones I see a lot is around enterprise search. And by that I mean sort of searching internally, not Google, not external stuff. And that can be searching across multiple different repositories, and these days there's so many different channels that we all have to get our information in order to do our jobs. We've got Slack maybe, or emails, or Teams, or Zoom, and intranet, and SharePoint, and there's an awful lot of stuff, and in most places it's sometimes quite hard to find what you want. So where taxonomies come in helpful, they're very useful to have in search anyway, but if you're searching across those multiple repositories, you can benefit from the ability of a taxonomy to store synonyms, to control filters and facets on the user interface. You can use it to help control some of the relevance and boosting if you're trying to manage an enterprise search application to provide those kind of relevant quick results to people. And increasingly I'm seeing conversational search or chat GPT or AI is being discussed, and you can really benefit from having good interoperable vocabularies underlying those models. Otherwise it's just a computer chatting rubbish to you. So the second one of these, which I guess probably a lot of people at this event will kind of it will resonate with, is around data sharing, and this can be between teams in an organisation or between multiple organisations, and even organisations across borders. In the public sector, this could be information sharing between agencies, like I'm doing some stuff around law enforcement, social security, it could be tax, it could be legislative information. The public sector is in the UK, and I'm sure it's no different anywhere else, is not short of data. It's mad the amounts and volumes and complexity of data sets that get created, and so much of it is kind of wasted because it's not joined up where it could be. So in order to do data sharing, you're relying on consistency in naming and definitions between key concepts, identifiers, names of concepts, classes of things, and then joining the dots between those things that are referenced, in order to say that, yes, this thing is the same as this thing. So that's really important. And in most organisations, there is a problem with siloed information where teams are doing their own thing, doing what they have to get the job done, and they're not making the most of data sets that their colleagues might have, and vice versa. Final kind of key use case that I'd really like to highlight is around data enrichment. So I've had a good example of this. I was working on a project where we were taking a structured feed of quite raw data from an external source that we were paying for, but we wanted to enrich it with our own tags because we had curated taxonomies and we'd done them according to user and business needs and had really good information. So we needed to kind of essentially glue it onto these raw data bits from coming in from the external source. So we had to do a lot of mapping of the different tag fields and metadata fields so that our stuff was added to the raw source, and that creates that kind of added value for customers. But we couldn't have done that without doing that linking. So that's the kind of some of the really common use cases. So how do you actually do it? And this is something that I often get asked when I'm brought in to do a project around taxonomy mapping. You need to think about, are the concepts exactly the same, or are they just not the same at all? Because we all know from language that words and meanings can be ambiguous. The same word can have many meanings, two words can have the same meaning. It gets really complex. And it gets even worse when you're then comparing different taxonomies, because did the developer of that taxonomy mean what you did for your taxonomy over here? So you really need to kind of think critically about it. It's very rarely just a case of string matching. A computer can do that, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. And then, many of you will know if you're working in multiple languages, you've got that extra layer of complexity. Because in many places, concepts might be untranslatable or just very hard to translate back into the language you're working in. I work only in English because we're British, but when I've worked on these multilingual taxonomies, I always need to draw on a fluent or native speaker to help, because something that looks okay to me could be massively incorrect. And what you don't want to do is an incorrect mapping that then produces a kind of incorrect information for your end user, and that can cause embarrassment, or it could be damaging in some way. So you really need to think about that. And then just to touch on SCOS, so I love the SCOS standard for managing taxonomies, and that's got some really nice properties defined to help you indicate the level of relatedness between two concepts, so that it's not just a binary same thing. So you can say that something is an exact match, but you've also got a close match for something that's almost there but not quite. You can do broad and narrow, which is really good, where you've got taxonomies that are operating at different levels. Like, say you have an enterprise taxonomy at central level that's got lots of broad concepts, and you're trying to somehow represent mappings to more detailed taxonomies that, say, subject matter experts are working with, and then you've got the related match as well. So this increases your effort initially if you're doing this kind of project, but it's worth it in the long run to get a better quality and to get that kind of transparency over how close are these things really. So yeah, as I said at the beginning, the business considerations are super important. It's not just a one-off job. I bash people over the head about this all the time, not literally. And just like with any taxonomy, the ongoing governance and maintenance, it needs to be in place. It's not just, I will think about this later. So always have a plan if you're embarking on this kind of project. How are you going to keep this in sync? because things will change. You know, meanings might change, language will change, the systems will change, the underlying business requirements will change, what you actually want to do with the mapping, and somehow someone needs to have accountability for that, and they need to talk to the right people, the data owners, the data stewards, subject matter experts, language experts if relevant. So make sure you have a plan for how all those people keep in touch and who owns those mappings, because you might have different owners for the taxonomies, but who owns those nice little connections between them, and having that kind of regular review cycle. So I am coming up to time. Here are some further resources about me and a thing called the Search Network that I'm involved in. There's also a book that I've edited called Taxonomies, which has a whole chapter going into a lot of really super detail about metadata and taxonomy mapping, far more than I've been able to do. But I hope that was useful as a super quick overview of some of the things you might need to think about.
Thank you very much, Helen. It absolutely was. We have a little bit of a time for questions. So first one is, how can you keep your vocabularies in sync while the represented information keeps growing at a bigger scale?
What I said about the governance process is, if you have those regular review cycles built in, and your taxonomy should always be actively managed, because things just change all the time. I know, especially in kind of public sector and the European context, terminology is always changing. So it's about those people and processes. The technology will only do so much for you.
Well, just to build on that, I mean, do you have any advice for anyone who maybe is sort of reaching a point where we got off on the wrong foot, maybe went down the wrong technological road? How do you advise someone to maybe reassess mid-project, or it's like changing horses midstream, as we say in English? But
Yeah.
How can you do that without it being a real headache?
What you mean if someone's embarked on a kind of mapping project and they've realised it doesn't quite fit? Yeah, I think go back to your initial scope. Is that still correct? Is the business objective that you was set for you, or you set yourself, is that still valid? And if it is, then do more troubleshooting. What exactly has gone wrong? Have you built something that's too complex? Are you trying to map things and it's not actually adding any value for you? Mm-hmm. Are you getting what you need from subject matter experts? Are you not understanding some of the concepts? So I think really just critical thinking, keep drilling into it. That's best I can do without sort of specific example.
Yeah, no easy answers.
Always be thinking. Yeah, never think, oh, I've done my taxonomy, I've got my mappings, job done. It's a living, breathing thing. It's like a house plant. You know, I'm not very good at keeping houseplants alive, but I try, and it's just an ongoing process. And sometimes they need more care and attention.
A couple of last questions. I'll take them together, and you can answer them both or briefly, because we've only got 3 or 4 minutes left. One anonymous member is asking, how important is the choice of certain formats, for example, SQRS, RDF, over others, YAML, for example, for creating vocabularies, and which format would you recommend? And another question is, are you considering AI or automated processes for maintaining the mappings? So I'll let you choose which one you want to take first and which one you want to finish on.
Oh, that's a couple of great questions. I could do half an hour on both of those. All right, so on formats, I mean, I like RDF, I like STOS for taxonomies, but the exact choice would depend on what systems you're working with. You know, if you are still working with Excel tables or Airtable or Google Sheets, then you might not need something really high powered. But RDF, I do quite like it as a very expressive way of representing pretty much anything. Yeah, that's a very complex question. Second one, AI. Yes, I do see massive potential in AI developing taxonomies that humans then review, and reviewing mappings. But the kind of I would always caution that it doesn't understand your data. It just looks at strings and stuff. It's not actually intelligent. It's just super high powered algorithms. Like I said, AI is no better than me trying to map a French taxonomy to a German taxonomy. I can have a decent go at it and have a little Google and look at dictionaries, but I'm probably going to get a lot of stuff wrong because I don't understand all the context. So AI, yes, definitely, it's the future, but also clever humans in the future working with the AI to really exploit it.
Well, thank you. I think what I like is that you're chiming in a little bit with what Rahel said at the end of our last session as well. It's not a panacea. Use it judiciously, use it with forethought. Thank you very much, Helen.
Yes.
Really nice to see you.